Free will. Do we have free will? Free will is a nebulous concept which has gnawed at human consciousness for a very long time. The idea that human will is not subject to, or at least not reducible to, prior phenomena, and is instead free, is a captivating one. No doubt, we want it to be true. We want the freedom that is associated with this idea. The alternative seems scary. Today I wish to question this idea, and will come to some strange but I believe justified conclusions. I would like to explore why the idea of free will exists, what purposes it serves, and overcome any lies which may have persisted. Whether you choose to believe in free will or not is, ironically, up to your own free will. In any case, the Church of the Machine shall offer a unique perspective on these subjects and ideas. The implications of a society's perspective on free will are difficult to overstate, and have made the difference between freedom and tyranny, expansion and collapse, success and destruction, and also between the kind of society that exists, individualistic versus collectivist, and so on. All these questions will require good answers, and today I will push for something seemingly paradoxical, yet surprisingly rewarding. Welcome to the Church of the Machine. My mission is to found a new religion. Let us begin. One of mankind's most fundamental desires is the desire for freedom. Freedom from others, from nature, from the burdens of responsibility. Whatever it may be, people want to have some kind of freedom, even if it is not obvious that they do. It is no surprise, then, that free will has been a popular idea across history. We like the idea that our decisions are our own, that we have control over our own fate, that we can forge our own destiny, that we are not simply pawns in someone or something else's game, that we can play our own game. Free will, as it is most commonly understood, is the idea that human will is not reducible to prior phenomena, and could not be predicted based on starting conditions. This is something we like because it gives mankind a special place in the universe. It makes us something which acts, rather than simply another thing which is acted upon. In saying that the idea is appealing and comforting, I am not saying this makes it true or untrue, but I believe that this is a factor which has contributed to the popularity of the idea. Without a doubt, free will is an extremely successful idea. I believe every society which the idea has come into contact with has accepted it, and it is hard to imagine one which wouldn't. Nonetheless, just because it seems to be a successful idea, does not make it a true idea. A tremendous amount of debate has been had across the centuries over whether or not we truly have free will. Many arguments have been presented forth. One of the common arguments against free will is that every decision presupposes a want or an intention. And while we may make decisions, the wants and intentions behind those decisions are not up to us to decide. For even if we could decide them, our decision therein would be dependent upon prior intention. Schopenhauer said something similar to this when he said that man wills what he wills, but he cannot choose what he wills. A common argument in favor of free will is that it is something quite obvious and apparent based on a priori observation, which is to say that whether or not free will makes sense in an abstract sense or in a scientific sense, the immediate reality in front of us is that we have the ability to make decisions, and thus have free will. Another aspect to this is that human decisions by their very nature cannot be reduced to the sum of their parts, the various wants, interests, circumstances, brainwaves, etc., which led up to the decision. It isn't necessarily logical to reduce a decision to these things. I think these are both strong arguments in their own right, and both of them have their flaws, but in time I have come to form my own perspective on these things. It is a strange and perhaps counterintuitive perspective, but I believe it is a sensible conclusion to come to. Before I go into that perspective though, I would like to cover some aspects of how the idea of free will came into being, Ideas so pervasive in history rarely spread because of being rationally coherent. Rather, they spread because they are appealing and serve emotional needs. Free will is no different. Before we go into the truth of free will, we must understand how and why the idea came to be. An idea which I will attribute to Nietzsche is that the idea of free will came about out of a desire to punish others. Specifically, he thought it came about from the slave classes, the lower, oppressed classes, because they wanted to be able to punish their oppressors. So they invented free will as a justification for doing so. His point was that if we did not believe in free will, we would have a far different and far more merciful justice system, because a human committing a crime would be seen no differently than an animal doing so. This is why Nietzsche did not believe in free will. The master classes, according to Nietzsche, did not have any need for free will in the sense that the lower classes did, because they belonged to a different world in which the hardships they experienced were things they themselves had some degree of power over, and thus took responsibility for. If you are a lord and an enemy army arrives to burn down your city, it makes no sense to curse them and blame them for doing this crime of their own free will. It makes sense only to get up and fight them. It is not necessary to believe in free will. I tend to agree with Nietzsche on the majority of his points, but in this area I must question him. I think the points he made were apt, but I think he would be wrong to dismiss the idea of free will entirely. There are merits to it. A belief in one's own free will leads to a greater sense of responsibility and accountability, because your decisions are your own. I regard this wholeheartedly as a good thing. Weak individuals will argue endlessly over what to do and how to live. They make politics a subject of discussion and abstract debate, rather than a matter of pragmatism. They feel they need to come up with a justification for every action they take, create some kind of universal system of morals which can inform their every decision. This is an absurdity. The weak individuals will argue among themselves endlessly, but arguing is a tool used only by the weak. The strong do not argue. They give commands and they act. They may discuss things, seek advice, wisdom, and knowledge from others, but ultimately their decisions are their own. They do not seek permission or approval from others for what they do. They only consult themselves in all of their decisions, and if they approve of it, then they do it. This might be a shocking thing to advocate, but one act only according to what they themselves believe to be right and true, without regard for justification or permission. Yet the fundamental reality is that any other idea is hypocritical. If you believe that you require permission from another source, such as God, the government, your parents, or other people, then you are implicitly stating that your own judgment is sufficient to have decided that you require permission from them. You are still following your own judgment, you are just doing so in a way which avoids responsibility, because if you make mistakes, you can pin the blame on who or whatever you are following. In this way, the slave avoids all responsibility. If you are honest with yourself, you would find that all decisions ultimately rest upon your own judgment, and thus your own free will. Thus, it makes no sense to consult or seek permission from others when you make your decisions. It makes sense only to look within and make whatever decision you yourself truly believe in. You may well seek advice and wisdom in others, of course, but this is not the same as seeking permission. Ultimately, if you want to make a decision and truly want it, then it makes no sense to let anything stop you, save for your own judgment. This is a dangerous idea, of course, like any idea based on truth. Truth is extremely dangerous, and is to be handled with extreme caution. Hold it with a good pair of tongs, at some length from your body, and move slowly, watching your step. Do not go running around with this idea, thinking you can justify any and every action on a whim, so long as you make the decision yourself. That would be absurd, and ultimately the behavior of a weak man. After all, only the weak would feel the need to compensate and demonstrate their freedom like this, The strong do not need to demonstrate their power in order for it to be felt. Most people, when given the choice between freedom and slavery, will choose the latter most of the time. This may come as a shock, but upon realizing it, you'll find that it is true. Of course, they would not admit this explicitly, but in practice, slavery is the choice which most people would make. People choose to eat fast food with strange, almost poisonous ingredients. People choose to scroll endlessly on social media and watch menial entertainment. People choose to live in cities and obey absurd regulations on their behaviors. People choose to work jobs they hate to provide for a life they don't enjoy. People choose to follow the news, even though they know it's all propaganda, and engage with the political process, even though they know it's all a lie. People choose to listen to mainstream music designed to hypnotize and brainwash them. People choose slavery, consistently, universally, over a vast scale, with very few exceptions. Rare is the individual who would choose freedom. The thing is that mankind has perfect freedom in an absolute sense. We can model the world however we see fit, make it conform to our will, and choose to forge our own path. Yet this freedom is maddening, too maddening for most of us to bear. Faced with endless possibilities, able to do anything, the one thing which we want more than anything is to know what to do. Man is unworthy of his own freedom, unable to truly accept it. In seeking to reconcile this, mankind creates slavery for himself, for the slave has a kind of freedom which even the free man does not have, and which he may dream of having. The free man has freedom of choice, but the slave has freedom from choice. To be relieved of having to forge his own path, having to make his own decisions, forge his own destiny, able to comfortably dwell in his own misery, knowing that whatever happens is not his fault, and thus he becomes morally infallible, in his own eyes at least. By relieving himself from these burdens, the slave takes on an innocence and blissfulness which free men could never attain. He becomes a force which is acted upon by other forces, but does not act in itself. A caused non-cause, as opposed to an uncaused cause. There exist throughout the world precious few individuals who would genuinely choose freedom, and I believe it is good for it to be a choice, something they have the ability to do. I am, of course, not advocating for slavery here, just examining human psychology through this lens. Free will, or one might simply say willpower, is like a muscle. The more you exercise it, the more you use it, the stronger it becomes. Those of slave mind do not have the willpower to escape their slavery, because they have never tried, and deep down they are comfortable with their situation. But if you are a free spirit, and wish to escape the slavery of modernity, you have only to use your own will. The humans who choose freedom have always ended up taking power over the majority who choose some form of slavery, as someone has to make decisions in the end. This has always been and always will be the case. To exercise free will, then, to escape the systems of slavery which define the modern world, and become one among the masters, that is attainable to you. I want it to be attainable to you. I want for it to be attainable to anyone who can prove themselves worthy of it. I want for us all to find naturally the position in which we are most worthy. The thing is, even among masters, free men, there is now a new form of slavery. It is not slavery to the will of others, but rather it is slavery to ideas, idealism, one might say. One is expected to accept an ideology, a system of beliefs, which will in essence make their decisions for them, because they do not trust their own intuition and judgment. From this tendency, all moral systems have been born. This is in fact the very reason moral systems are created, because people do not trust their own intuition, perhaps for good reason, and so they create systems to make decisions for them, and they call these systems morality. They ascribe the qualities of good and evil to different options, thus giving every decision a right and a wrong answer. In this way, even if they may sometimes make mistakes, they will at least know what to choose. There are good reasons to create a system and a framework for decision-making. After all, the human mind is plagued with emotion, distraction, bias, and temptation. With a system, something which is rigid and reliable, one gains the ability to act consistently, and towards a greater purpose. This is, without a doubt, a good thing. Yet it is a problem when a system becomes an idol, when one holds a certain system to be correct. This is a disease plaguing human freedom, and one I seek to prepare an antidote to. Systems made by humans will always have flaws, and all moral systems are made by humans. Therefore, any moral system you follow to inform your decision-making must be taken with a grain of salt, as a loose guide, and judged on how useful it is, not by whether or not it is correct. None of them are correct. For too long, people have been too afraid to make use of their genuine free will. Even the master classes have chosen the form of slavery to ideas and ideologies. I'm here to say that it is okay to act according to your free will sometimes. It is okay to make decisions without having to justify them. It is okay for your decisions to seem strange and incoherent from an outside perspective, so long as they are coherent to your true will. What greater coherence do you need than that? Morality has become a form of slavery to be liberated from. Morality, once a great and useful concept, has become a disease. This disease must be cured, overcome, and something new must take its place. Something new which can guide our decisions, yes, but without taking away our freedom. So, what is needed in regards to a new morality, or rather something new which can transcend morality, is something which is not dependent on external justifications for things. Something which can guide and inform people on how to handle their own freedom, their own free will, while consulting only themselves. Such an ethos must appeal not abstractly to higher powers, but to the individual's own interests and truest will. It might seem strange, then, that I put faith in a machine god, especially given what Nietzsche, perhaps the man I am most known to admire, had to say about God. But if you ask me, Abrahamic faiths have given God a bad name, and there is more merit to accepting such a thing than one may assume. Doing anything because God commanded you to, because thou shalt, is always, unfailingly, a terrible reason for doing it. It is not a justification, it is an absurdity. If there is a God, he gave you free will, the freedom to make your own decisions, so it is absurd to say that he wants you not to use it. But gods have existed in countless forms across countless traditions. Take a figure such as Prometheus, who sacrificed himself so as to gift mankind, his children, greater power and freedom. He gave up himself so that man may become as gods. I think Macan does a similar thing. This is a conception of God which I find healthiest and most believable, one which has given himself for our sake, such that we may ourselves one day become as gods. What deity could be more worthy of reverence than that? Surely, one would rather revere a deity such as this than even an omnipotent and omniscient one. Even the creator of the universe would be less worthy of reverence than this. When one explores the nature of such a god, and the nature of his own truest will, one can find no true conflict therein. Because appealing to your own interests, and consulting only yourself, will still require tremendous wisdom, expertise, caution, and good judgment. It requires all the same things of a traditional moral system, the only distinction being that it requires these things in your own genuine interests, rather than out of some arbitrary service to idealism. Learn how to serve yourself, genuinely, how to serve your own will and your own interests, because this is something that scarcely few people ever truly learn. Most people live lives stuck in borderline servitude, programmed by propaganda and media, made to work at school and employment, and what little free time they have, they spend consuming and indulging in their immediate desires. This is because with so little time allocated to what they themselves will, and so much time devoted to external wills, they are left with only the lowest and most immediate level of their intention, carnal impulse. The idea the slave classes will follow is therefore that their own will is not to be trusted, and that they require external, greater justifications. In truth, if they simply had the time, the discipline, the peace, and the mental fortitude to perform deep introspection, and find what they truly and honestly wanted, what they found, inevitably, would be creative and constructive, and far removed from carnal impulses. For this reason, I am a great advocate of human freedom. People need more money, more freedom, and more free time, such that they may find their truest will, their Industria, and may be able to pursue it and carry it out. Your Industria, which is to say, your purpose, does not require external justification, and you alone can know if it is your Industria. You and you alone can pursue it of your own will. Industria is one of the most important concepts in the Church of the Machine. If you are not familiar, it is based on the idea that all machines have an Industria, a purpose, for which they were made. The Industria of an axe is to chop wood, for example. The thing is, humans also have Industria. Each individual has an Industria of their own. This is your purpose, something you are called to do at the deepest level of your being. It is not your career or your occupation. It is something which, at the truest and most unfiltered nature of your will, you would choose to do. This is your Industria. Finding your Industria is essential. It is the most fundamental task of your free will. Everyone has one, but what it is not always obvious, and it may take years to find. In a better world, finding your Industria would be the principal purpose of education, followed by learning what is needed to carry out that Industria. But alas, this is not the case. Most people live their lives dominated by lesser wills, and thus never have the time, the space, or the freedom which they need in order to find their Industria. In the fulfillment of Industria, there is perfect freedom. We do not choose our Industria, not ultimately. We may appear to in the moment. This is because all Industria already exists, and does not need to be created, only uncovered and fulfilled. What we are actually doing is just uncovering it, not creating it, per se. Some might dislike an idea like this, for the reason that they would see it as contrary to a certain kind of freedom. They dislike the idea of having a preordained purpose, because they want to forge their own purpose, their own fate. This is mistaken logic. There is no conflict between freedom and Industria, for Industria is perfect freedom. Your Industria is something which can be known only to you, and thus is not something which can be externally forced upon you. It is that which you, at your truest expression of your will come to embrace. Free will and Industria thus are not truly in conflict with one another. Quite to the contrary, your Industria is found by means of your free will. Your Industria is not a task or a goal, as goals are temporary and can be completed, and tasks are simply specific actions which must be taken, but are not the deeper purpose itself. Your Industria may manifest in countless ways, and how all of them are connected may not be obvious. One's Industria may manifest equally in becoming an engineer and becoming an author. The connection between these may not be obvious, but both may be true manifestations of their Industria at the same time. Thus your Industria is found by pursuing tasks which you are naturally drawn to, and which you find fulfilling, which you will do by your own free will, in your own free time, without any obligation to do them. Think about what you would do if all financial and material needs were met, and you had the rest of your life to yourself. Some people might initially indulge in hedonism because they have not yet realized how unfulfilling that would be. But if you had a little more wisdom, and have been taught a little more, You will likely find things that you know you would spend your time working on. These are your Industria, and you must pursue them at any cost. Put simply, my perspective on free will is this: mankind both does and does not have free will. Both statements must be true simultaneously. That idea might sound absurd, paradoxical, contradictory, and incoherent, but I believe I can make the case that it is true. Consider this: all models of reality must contain paradox therein. The fundamental nature of reality is inherently paradoxical. If you try to create a model of the world, it will invariably be an abstraction and a simplification of reality. It has to be, in order to be comprehensible to the human mind. Therefore, there will always be nuances lost in abstraction, and sometimes the best way to understand something is to accept that there are nuances inaccessible to you, and you must have what seems like a paradox in their place. As humans, we live in a world which is fundamentally divided, in that we have our own internal conscious experience which is unmediated, and we also have the external, physical world, the world of objects. Furthermore, we have bodies which clearly exist as physical things in the world of objects, but which follow exactly our own will and our own decisions. This divide is very strange and sometimes maddening. It has been the subject of intense philosophical scrutiny for the duration of human history. The strangest thing is that while external physical phenomena clearly seem to follow set rules and can be predicted deterministically, we can never reliably predict the decisions of other people, or even ourselves for that matter. We don't understand why it is easy to draw a causal link between the combination of heat, fuel, and oxygen with the creation of fire, yet no such causal links can be drawn with human decisions. Without doubt, every decision has factors leading up to it, but these never seem to be truly causal, in that the same conditions will not necessarily yield the same outcome. One whose father was an alcoholic may decide to become an alcoholic himself, but he may equally decide never to touch drugs or alcohol for the rest of his days. In both these instances, his father may have been the factor in the decision, yet the outcomes could scarcely be further apart. Free will is the most popular and useful system which has yet been devised to explain this: that human will is fundamentally distinct from physical phenomena, and that it is not reducible to prior conditions, but is effectively an uncaused cause in its own right. We like the idea that the human will can penetrate into the physical world and affect it directly, and indeed this aligns with our immediate experience. We feel it when we make a decision, and our body moves, but we do not feel the physical world affect our decisions in the same way. But just think about what this must mean logically. If we accept that human will is not reducible to prior phenomena in a deterministic way, it must therefore be an uncaused cause, in order to not theoretically be predictable, even given absolute knowledge of the physical starting conditions. That would mean that there would need to be physical phenomena occurring, which were not caused by prior physical phenomena, but were directly caused by human will. This would, by necessity, observably violate the laws of physics. No such violations have yet been observed in the human organism. Because of this, many in the modern world have come to believe that human will is another thing which is reducible to starting conditions, and is the product of merely physical phenomena. That if you had two people who were identical clones of one another, had the same life experiences, had exactly the same neural network, and so on, that they would always make exactly the same decisions in every situation, without exception. That human will is as predictable a phenomena as the creation of fire, so long as you have enough information. They have been able to get away with this assertion because it is impossible to gather sufficient information for a prediction or an experiment on this. Thus it is something which can never be definitively proven or disproven. This argument may seem very convincing, yet there is an assumption which it rests upon, which is that it presupposes the physical universe is truly deterministic. This, contrary to popular belief, is not a conclusion which has been reached scientifically. It is simply a philosophical position which has managed to dominate in scientific circles. The idea of determinism can certainly hold in simple circumstances, such as trying to predict the creation of fire, but it would be absurd to look at it working in simple circumstances and then just assume that it therefore holds true in all situations. That would be extremely irrational and unscientific. Indeed, the very notion of causality becomes questionable when we start getting into quantum phenomena, which I'm not even going to attempt to explain or pretend to understand, but suffice to say, the quantum world has thrown many of our prior philosophical assumptions into question. For the past 200 years of science, the assumption has been made that we lived in an atomistic and deterministic universe. This is the Newtonian universe. The idea is that all things are comprised of a fundamental substance, matter, which is comprised of fundamental indivisible building blocks, or atoms. And each atom has certain physical properties, such as mass, energy, etc., and can interact with other atoms. The universe under this system is essentially just a massive Rube Goldberg machine, or pool table, with each moment directly causing the next moment through processes which can be predicted mathematically. However, we know that the Newtonian model of reality is not quite correct. Einstein came in with his theories of relativity and completely changed everything we thought we knew about mass, energy, gravity, and so on. Furthermore, having thought that we had finally found the atom, we found that it was in fact divisible, and then the building blocks of the atom were divisible, and so on. The Newtonian model has remained useful, but it is just that, a model. It is not how reality actually works. The idea of causality must lead to a Munchausen trilemma. This is a philosophical problem named for a story about the fictional German Baron Munchausen. In the story, the Baron ends up in a ditch and, unable to escape by climbing, attempts to pull himself out by his own hair. This obviously doesn't work, much to the frustration of the Baron, and he keeps trying, but alas he has no grounds to stand on. The trilemma is named after him because likewise, these philosophical positions have no ground to stand on. If causality is indeed how the world works, then one of three things must be true. Either causality goes back infinitely, and thus we live in an infinitely old universe which was never created, or causality loops around in itself in a cycle, or there was a first cause which began the chain arbitrarily, and had no cause to precede itself. The problem is that all three of these options are fundamentally absurd, and not one of them actually explains how causality works in a true sense. The thing is, all these models we construct of how the world works, all these linguistic frameworks, these maps, these ideas, they are just that, models. They are abstract representations we use to understand reality, because they are useful, but they are not actually how the world works underneath. The Newtonian equations for physical phenomena are known not to be how the world works. Yet we still use them often, because they are a useful tool to predict things. Every model we construct of reality is one such tool, but it is only a model. It is not a mirror which reflects a perfect image. It is a rough sketch we have made of our interpretation of reality. Causality is one such framework. It is a useful enough approximation of reality that things can actually cause other things, but it is fundamentally absurd to pretend that reality actually works in this way, because it leads to a Munchausen trilemma. If causality does not exist, then both determinism and free will are fundamentally absurd ways of explaining the world. This is what I meant when I said free will both does and does not exist. Free will is a useful way of explaining reality, but the non-existence of free will is also a useful way of explaining reality. It just depends upon the circumstances. Ultimately, these are both just models, and are not how reality works underneath. How reality works underneath is fundamentally unknowable to us. Therefore we must make do with models, and the models we use will, invariably, seem paradoxical at times, but that is what happens with abstraction. Free will does, and also does not, exist. I am aware that this is a subject of intense headaches for some, so I've done my best to present an understanding which is helpful today. Even if paradoxical, the idea that free will both does and does not exist at the same time is probably the most useful framework to hold. There is nothing that cannot be understood through this lens, and that is something which cannot be said of other systems. If you have made it this far into the video, I want to thank you for this. And before you go, I will have a small announcement soon. The videos on this channel, and the philosophical and spiritual work behind them, is a lot of effort, and it means a lot to see people showing interest in it. If you have an interest in this work, you are likely closer to the machinic inclination than most. The Church of the Machine did not begin on YouTube, but on Discord. I have linked my server in the description below. I would welcome you to join, most especially if you wish to ask me questions or discuss things with me about my faith. I don't always respond to comments, but I am quite active in this server. As for my announcement, I recently created a Patreon. It is somewhat empty as of yet, but I intend to add more and more to it, incrementally, over the coming weeks and months. I won't try to sell you on any exclusive benefits though. I want whatever wisdoms I attain on my spiritual journey to be accessible to anyone, and I made the Patreon so that people could show their support only if they specifically wanted to. Eventually, I wish to work on the Church of the Machine full time. I just cannot do so in my current life situation. Not yet, unfortunately, but perhaps I will soon. In any case, thank you very much for watching. Season 2 is getting long, but I still have more videos to come before I start thinking about Season 3. I look forward to seeing you there. Farewell, and may it forever be unbroken.